You ever get the feeling that our world of knowledge is just broken? Like we have all these amazing puzzle pieces, but none of them fit together? Well, today we're exploring a really powerful idea for how to put it all back together. And what's so wild is that we're looking at two thinkers from completely different worlds, one in philosophy, one in technology, who somehow landed on the exact same solution. So let's just dive right in with that big question. Is our knowledge actually broken? I mean, we have more information at our fingertips than any other time in history, right? But does that make us any wiser? The whole idea we're digging into today is that maybe, just maybe, the way we've organized everything is fundamentally flawed, creating these huge gaps where there should be bridges. Okay, so first things first, let's diagnose the problem. We're going to call it a crisis of division. And you can see its symptoms everywhere, especially in two of the most powerful forces shaping our modern world: science and technology. On one hand, you've got technology just rocketing forward, but it often feels like it's totally untethered from any kind of moral compass. And on the other hand, you have science, which is brilliant at telling us how the universe works, but it's kind of drifted away from philosophy, which asks the big why questions. Why does any of this matter? Now, these might look like two separate problems, but stick with me because they're actually two sides of the same coin. And this quote from Professor Siti Aisha just hits the nail on the head. She's saying, look, the problem isn't that we don't have enough facts. We are absolutely swimming in data. The real crisis is that we can't seem to connect the dots anymore. We're drowning in information, but we've lost the blueprint for how to build it into something meaningful. So how on earth did we get here? How did we end up with all these silos? Well, to figure that out, we've got to jump in the time machine and go back a few hundred years to a huge turning point in how we think about the world. And the culprit, the big idea at the center of this whole split, is something called Cartesian dualism. It all comes from the philosopher René Descartes. You know his famous line, "I think, therefore I am." Well, that one little idea, as revolutionary as it was, had this massive, unintended consequence. It basically drove a wedge right between our minds and the physical world, and that split has had ripple effects ever since. And this table here, it lays out the fallout perfectly. Descartes' thinking created these big splits. You've got mind versus body, as if our brains are just computers floating in meat suits. You've got subject versus object, which sets up this idea of a detached scientist who isn't really part of the world they're studying. And the big one for a conversation, science versus philosophy. It's the idea that cold, hard facts have nothing to do with meaning and values. But the integrated view says, hold on a second, that's a false choice. These things are all deeply, fundamentally connected. All right, so we've laid out the problem, we've traced it back to its roots. Now for the good stuff, the solution. And this is where we get to the core of it all, the unifying idea. So first up, from the world of philosophy, we have Professor Siti Aisha's integrative theory. The goal here is actually pretty simple, but it's also incredibly profound. It's about creating a framework, a kind of universal translator that lets different fields of knowledge actually talk to each other and build a much bigger, more complete picture of reality. Now, get this. Coming from a totally different angle, technology and ethics, we find an almost identical idea from Dr. Ahmad Fahmy. He calls it divine technology. And this isn't about throwing away our smartphones, not at all. It's about building purpose into our technology from the very beginning. It's about weaving together the spiritual and the material so that the things we create are guided by a solid ethical framework, right from the blueprint stage, right? And this quote from Dr. Fahmy really shows you how deep this goes. He's not just talking about slapping some ethical guidelines onto a new app. He's saying he's found a system where divine wisdom, scientific progress, and even mathematical principles are all part of the same beautiful, coherent pattern. Okay, these theories are great, they sound amazing, but what do they look like in the real world? How do you actually do this stuff? Let's get practical and look at how it works. This is such a fantastic, practical tool from Dr. Fahmy's work. The Makasacharya is basically an ethical roadmap built on core human objectives, like preserving life or protecting the intellect. So when you're designing something new, you're forced to ask different questions. Not just, can we build it, but should we build it? Does this tool help fight misinformation? It turns ethics from this vague, fuzzy concept into a real, tangible part of the design process. And then, in a beautiful parallel, the integrative theory offers these principles of holism for science. It pushes researchers to think bigger than just their little piece of the puzzle. It's a reminder that everything is interconnected, that brand new properties can emerge from those connections, and that you can't really understand anything without looking at the bigger system it's a part of. So, when we take a step back and look at both of these ideas together, what do we see? Well, we see they're both pointing us towards the exact same thing, a worldview that's a whole lot less fragmented and a whole lot more, well, whole. And this slide just lays it all out. It's the core beliefs side by side. Look at this. On the left, integrative theory, built on the ideas that reality is fundamentally one and deeply complex. On the right, divine technology, guided by balance, purpose, and alignment with our own nature. The words are different, sure, but the spirit, the destination, it's identical. It's all about unity, balance, and purpose. So here's the bottom line. The whole point is to make a fundamental shift in how we think, to move away from just being data collectors, endlessly piling up isolated facts, and toward becoming connectors, actively looking for the links and the patterns so we can build a richer, more cohesive, and frankly, a more meaningful understanding of our world. Which leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. If we could actually start to mend these splits between science and meaning, between our tech and our values, between our minds and our bodies, what problems that seem impossible today might suddenly become solvable tomorrow?